The lock had never been cracked, not in 41 years. Harlan Voss said that every time someone asked, he said it the way men say things they've rehearsed. So many times the words no longer feel like boasting, they feel like fact. He said it at the dinner table of Voss Capital's annual board retreat in Whistler, and the 12 men around him nodded. The way they always nodded, because nodding cost nothing and disagreeing cost everything. The safe was a Meridian DR9, custom-built, the only one of its kind, designed in 1983 by a locksmith named Édouard Pellerin, who'd since died without publishing his schematics. Harlan had kept it in the corner of his oak-paneled office on the 44th floor of a downtown Toronto tower, not because he needed a safe. He had digital vaults, offshore accounts, 3 different law firms managing his assets. But because the Meridian was a symbol, it said, "Some things cannot be taken from me." On the morning of April 14th, Tessa Abara-Okonkwo walked through the glass doors of Voss Capital at 8:47 a.m., a canvas tote bag over one shoulder, and a résumé she hadn't updated in 2 years because she'd been too busy actually doing the work. She was 29 years old. She had grown up in Scarborough, the daughter of a man who fixed things for a living. Appliances, cars, broken porch steps, anything the neighbors brought to his driveway, on a Saturday morning. Her father, Kofi Abara-Okonkwo, had never made more than $50,000 in a single year. He had also never left anything broken that came into his hands. Tessa had his hands. She was there, that morning, for a junior analyst position 3rd round interview. She'd made it further than she expected, further than anyone from her neighborhood expected, and she'd told herself not to think about that, because thinking about it made her chest tight. And she needed her chest to be calm. The receptionist told her to wait. She waited 40 minutes. When the door to the boardroom finally opened, it wasn't the HR coordinator she'd met twice before. It was Harlan Voss himself, in a navy suit, holding a coffee he hadn't offered to share. He looked at her the way certain men look at things they've already decided aren't worth their time. Quickly. Conclusively, with the faint suggestion that the looking itself was a courtesy. "Miss Abara," he said, dropping the second half of her name the way people drop things they find cumbersome. "Abara-Okonkwo," she said, pleasantly, without apology. Something shifted in his face, not anger, something closer to amusement. He sat down at the head of the table. The other men, there were 4 of them, senior partners, all wearing variations of the same expression, arranged themselves along the sides. Tessa sat across from Harlan and set her tote bag on the floor and folded her hands on the table. The interview began normally enough. Her educational background, her years at a mid-sized firm in Mississauga, her proficiency with financial modeling software. Then Harlan leaned back in his chair and said, "Tell me, what does your father do?" The room didn't change. The light didn't shift, but something in the air compressed slightly, the way air does before weather. "He's a repair technician," Tessa said, "independent contractor." Harlan nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they've just confirmed something they already suspected. "A repairman," he said. The word landed differently than the phrase she'd used. Flatter, smaller. "That's one way to put it. And your mother?" "She retired from the TTC last year. 32 years as a driver." He looked at the other men, not conspiratorially. He didn't need to be conspiratorial. He simply looked at them, and they understood. "I ask," Harlan said, setting his coffee down, "because this role requires a certain fluency. With the way things work at this level, some people come to it naturally. Others spend their whole careers trying to learn it and never quite." He made a small gesture with his hand. A gesture that completed the sentence without words. Tessa looked at him steadily. "I understand." She didn't say anything else. She had learned, from watching her father work, that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was let a man believe he'd finished speaking when he hadn't said anything at all. The interview wound down. There was talk of next steps. There were no next steps. She could hear it in the way they thanked her. Thorough, final, like a door being closed quietly so no one would hear the click. She picked up her tote bag. And that was when she saw it. The Meridian, DR9, sat in the corner of the boardroom. She hadn't noticed it when she'd walked in, hadn't been looking for it. But now that she was standing, it was directly in her line of sight, and something in her chest moved the way it always moved when she saw a mechanism she recognized. She stopped. "That's a Meridian," she said. Harlan looked up. "Excuse me?" "The safe. In the corner. That's a Meridian DR9. She tilted her head slightly. Serial numbers probably in the low 400s, given the handle placement. Pellerin changed the bracket alignment after Unit 450 or so. The room was quiet in a different way now. "You know safes," Harlan said. It was not quite a question. "My father does," Tessa said. "He taught me." Harlan Voss looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, the slow private smile of a man who has just seen an opportunity to demonstrate something. "The Meridian hasn't been opened in 11 years, he said. "The combination was lost when my former CFO retired. We've had 3 locksmiths look at it. 2 safecrackers from the firm we use for our security consulting. None of them could get in." He paused. "It's not a functioning safe anymore. It's a very expensive piece of history. May I look at it?" "You can try," he said it lightly, generously. The way someone says help yourself when they're certain you'll fail. She crossed the room. The Meridian DR9 was a beautiful machine if you knew how to look at it. 3-spoke handle, titanium reinforced door, a combination dial that ran to 100 positions with a tolerance of less than 1/4 turn. Pellerin had built the mechanism around a 7-lever lock system. Unusual for 1983, unnecessarily complex, the kind of thing an engineer builds not because it's practical, but because he wants to prove something. Tessa crouched in front of it. She pressed one hand flat against the door and felt the slight give of the metal, the barely there vibration that told her about the humidity in the room, and how long the safe had been sitting, without being touched. She put her ear close. Not touching, just near, and she closed her eyes. "This is unnecessary," said one of the senior partners. His name was Jeffrey Carr, and he'd been bored by the whole morning. "Give her a moment," Harlan said. He was watching now, with real attention. Tessa could feel it. Her father had taught her to listen to locks before she could drive. A lock, he used to say, sitting at the workbench in their garage while 8-year-old Tessa handed him tools, is just a question somebody built out of metal. Your job is to figure out what answer it's looking for. She began to dial. Not quickly, not with any drama. She turned the dial with the same deliberate patience her father used when he was doing something that mattered. The same patience he'd used when he stayed up until 2 in the morning to fix Mrs. Nkemdirim's washing machine because she'd said she couldn't afford the laundromat, and he'd said he'd look at it, and he always did what he said. The men in the room were not watching her anymore, so much as watching the safe. On the 3rd pass, right, left, right. Small. Conclusive, like a single word spoken at the end of a very long conversation. The handle turned. The door opened. The room didn't erupt. It didn't do anything dramatic. The 4 senior partners simply went still in the particular way that men go still when something has happened that they have no prepared response for. Inside the Meridian were folders, old ones. Paper, not digital. A watch. A small photograph of a man Tessa didn't recognize. Nothing extraordinary except for the fact that it was there, visible, accessible, after 11 years of not being either of those things. Harlan Voss stood up from his chair very slowly. He walked to where Tessa was still crouching, and he looked at the open door of the Meridian for a long time without saying anything. Then he said, "How?" Not "how did you do that?" Not "how is that possible?" Just, "how?" A single word with all the air let out of it. "My father taught me," Tessa said. She stood up and smoothed the front of her jacket. She looked at Harlan Voss directly, the way she had learned to look at people who had decided something about her before she'd spoken. Not with anger, not with triumph, just with the clear, undecorated truth of her own presence. "The Meridian uses a sequential bounce technique," she said. "The levers reset at irregular intervals, but there's a pattern in the resistance. You can feel it if you go slowly enough." My dad cracked one for a client in Ajax about 15 years ago. He let me watch. Then he made me practice on a training model until I could do it myself." She paused. "I was 12. Jeff Goffrey Carr made a sound that might have been a cough or might have been something else entirely." Harlan Voss looked at Tessa Abara-Okonkwo for a long moment. In his expression was something complicated, something that had started as amusement and moved through surprise and was now somewhere else, somewhere he probably didn't visit very often. "The position," he said finally, "is still open, I know. The salary is." "I know what the salary is," Tessa said. "I also know you have 3 open files in your forensic accounting division that haven't moved in 8 months because no one on your current team has the pattern recognition background to untangle the subsidiary structures." She picked up her tote bag from where she'd left it on the floor. "I do. I can have preliminary findings on the Calderon file within 2 weeks. 4 weeks if you want all 3. The room was very quiet. "That information," Harlan said carefully, "isn't public." "No," Tessa agreed, "it isn't." She said it without explaining herself further. She had not gotten that information improperly. She'd put it together from public filings, a conference paper, and something a former colleague had mentioned offhandedly at a CPA networking event in Hamilton. But she'd learned from her father that you didn't always need to explain how you knew something. Sometimes you just needed to let the knowing stand on its own. Harlan Voss sat back down. For the first time that morning, he looked like a man who was actually thinking rather than performing the act of thinking. "The offer we discussed with HR," he said. "We can do better than that." Tessa didn't smile. She didn't need to. "I'll need it in writing by Friday," she said, "and I'd like to discuss the partnership track timeline before I sign anything." Jeffrey Carr made the sound again. But Harlan nodded. 3 months later, Tessa Abara-Okonkwo had an office on the 42nd floor. It was smaller than the one she'd eventually have. She knew that, the way she knew most things, patiently, and without requiring anyone to confirm it. But it had a window that looked north toward the lake, and on clear mornings she could see all the way to the Scarborough bluffs. She called her father on her lunch break. Most days, she told him about the work. He told her about what was on his bench. Last week, a vintage Seiko that a man from Pickering had driven 2 hours to bring him, because he'd heard that Kofi was the one you went to when no one else could fix it. "Did you get it?" she asked. "Of course," he said. Like it was obvious, she told him about the Meridian. She hadn't told him right away, had saved it, let it wait until it felt right. He listened without interrupting, which was how he always listened. When she finished, there was a moment of quiet. "12-year-old you," he said, "wouldn't have believed it. 12-year-old me practiced on that training model for 4 hours every weekend for a year." "I know," he said. "I was there." She looked out the window at the gray shimmer of the lake. Down the hall, she had a meeting in 20 minutes with the 2 senior partners assigned to the Calderon file. They had started the meeting last week by explaining the file structure to her. By the end of the hour, she had been explaining it to them. These things take time. She understood that. She had her father's patience, the patience of a man who had spent 30 years fixing the things other people couldn't be bothered with, who had passed that patience to his daughter like a tool, worn smooth at the handle, perfectly balanced, absolutely reliable. Some people look at a locked door and see the end of the road. Tessa Abara-Okonkwo had been taught, from the time she was old enough to hold a tool, that a locked door is just a conversation waiting to happen. She had always known how to listen,